morning, everybody. Welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here by Jonna Spilbor, and thanks for joining us here on the network where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. Let's get started right now. First up, want to let you know about the Charles Merritt case. You know, we've been following this case day in and day out. It is from California. It is dark today, and it is the case about this man who's been charged with brutally killing an entire family back in 2010 and then burying their bodies in the Mojave Desert. The remains of this family were found in 2013 in two shallow graves. Really disturbing case, and we are trying to understand what happened here. The prosecution has said that Mr. Merritt killed this family for financial gain, that he ultimately wanted to embezzle the funds from Joseph McStay's business. The defense is saying not so fast. There's an alternative suspect that the investigators did not thoroughly look at, a man named Dan Cavanaugh, and that became into play last week in court. In fact, under cross-examination, there was a lead detective who was questioned about why he didn't thoroughly look into this Dan Cavanaugh suspect, and we're going to talk more about that a little bit later on in the program. Again, court is dark today, but it will resume this week. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. Next up, I want to also talk to you about something we're going to cover a little bit later on in the program. There has been an update in the Donald Smith case. You remember we covered this one, the man who was found guilty of kidnapping, raping, and brutally killing an 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle. Everybody probably remembers this one. He was found guilty and was ultimately sentenced to death. He's currently on death row. Well, there has been a development. In secret jailhouse videos, Mr. Smith is seen speaking with his mother about confessing to this crime and the details of this crime. I warn our viewers, it is very disturbing, and we will talk more about this development because it's pretty earth-shattering. But again, that's the Donald Smith case. We'll focus more about that in about an hour. Right now, our focus, though, is on Iowa in the Cheyanne Harris case. Court is dark today. It will resume tomorrow, but let's talk about it right now. So this woman is on trial for first-degree murder and child endangerment in connection with the death of her 4-month-old son, baby Sterling. You might remember this case because we covered the trial of the father, Zachary Cohen, who was found guilty of the same charges, and he is now actually trying to get a new trial for himself, but we're focusing on Cheyanne Harris. The state has officially rested. We believe the defense will begin their case tomorrow. We expect a late start in that courtroom. But right now, for the first part of the program, we're going to recap some of the things you might have missed. And last week, we saw Cheyanne Harris's police interrogation tape. If you haven't seen it, take a look.
Remember next.
She wakes me up around noon.
Everybody sleeping.
She was actually in the playpen right next to the bed.
Okay.
On Zach's side, of course.
Sterling was in a different bedroom? Okay. So Nala wakes you up around noon. What happens next?
I got up and changed her diaper. Went to the bathroom myself. Fed her. And then I got her set up in the living room to watch a movie for a little bit.
What did you feed her? Do you remember?
Cold cheese.
That's okay. So is that part of the separation, keeping those two separated? Is that he's in his own bedroom, Sterling's in his bedroom, and
plus Nala has really bad Zach gets hot really easy, and so does Nala. So we have the AC on a lot, but Sterling, he's small, so he gets colder easy.
Sure.
And so every room has its own little dial thing for the heater.
Okay.
So it's easier to keep him warm.
Does he stay pretty much in that bedroom then? Is that kind of his area? That bedroom that Sterling was in? Okay.
Okay, let's break this down right now with Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, as I'm reading the Iowa law on child endangerment and first-degree murder, I like to think I'm reading it right, there needs to be some aspect of willfulness and intention, deliberate. Are you getting the sense that the prosecution is building that strong case for the fact that what she did to Sterling, she knew she was doing and almost meant to do?
Well, that's their job. And what we saw last week basically is what the prosecution laid out was that this 4-month-old child was in a room by himself with the curtains drawn, no air conditioning on. It was the middle of the summer. The temperature in the room was very hot. And that there was plenty of other nutrition and sustenance for everybody else in the family. And in fact, there was a second child who was not harmed. When you put all of those elements together, I do think it builds a strong case that this obviously was no accident, what happened to this 4-month-old.
But let me ask you this. If you believe, if you're sitting on the jury that she got high and was you know, maybe suffering from postpartum depression, and maybe she wasn't thinking clearly and forgot about him, can that also be first-degree murder or child endangerment, or is that reasonable doubt?
So no. So if the defense successfully puts forth some kind of intoxication defense, or I think their better option is the diminished capacity based on a form of postpartum. If they successfully...
Meaning she couldn't actually take care of him?
That she didn't have the mens rea, she didn't have the intent for first-degree murder, then at least it brings it off first-degree murder, and perhaps she might be guilty of something less like a manslaughter charge. I don't know, Jesse, if it's going to get her off entirely. We're going to have to wait and see what kind of defense they actually mount, because look, you got 12 people on this jury that are going to sit there and say, all right, this child was in his own filth, uncared for a week. You know, on Monday you did nothing, on Tuesday you did nothing, on Wednesday you did nothing. At some point they're going to say, I'm sorry, you are fully responsible.
The defense was very short in their opening statement, said there's a lot of factors for the jury to consider, mental illness, drugs, but they didn't say more. Are you saying that we're waiting to see what they ultimately say in their closing argument for jury? Now that we've heard everything, this is what we think you should do?
I think in terms of the defense, they're going to have to bring in an expert to talk about what was going on in Cheyanne's brain, because that's the crucial element here. And once we hear that testimony, then we're going to decide how their closing argument will pan out.
Yeah. Okay, well, we have more to talk about before we even touch upon the defense, so let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to play you more from the Cheyanne Harris trial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're reviewing the Cheyanne Harris case. We're not going to be live there today. There's no court. It'll be back tomorrow. But right now, we're analyzing things that you might have missed from last week. Remember, she's charged with first-degree murder and child endangerment in connection with the death of her 4-month-old son, baby Sterling. What we're about to play for you is going to be very difficult to listen to, but it's important. So, baby Sterling died from a combination of malnutrition, dehydration, and a diaper rash, an infection that was caused by a diaper rash. And this combination of factors ultimately resulted in his death. The way we know this is that one of the things from last week was the testimony of Dr. Dennis Klein, the state medical examiner, who came on the stand and explained the circumstances of this baby's death. So I warn our viewers, this may be very difficult to listen to, but it's very important for the prosecution in building their case. Take a look.
If someone had claimed to have been with Sterling on August 29th, Sterling was found on August 30th. You're aware of that?
Yes.
If someone had claimed to have been with him on August 29th and said that he was fed and a diaper changed, do you find that to be possible from the evidence that you saw?
The diaper that I saw did not appear to have been changed on the 29th, because I did the autopsy on the 31st. The body was, Sterling was found and transported on the 30th. So the diaper appeared to have been unchanged much longer than a day.
In your opinion, the condition that Sterling was in, could he even have taken a bottle on the 29th?
The condition that I saw Sterling at the time of autopsy, he looked what I use the term cachectic, or severely emaciated. He was severely dehydrated. He was severely underweight. It's hard to judge exactly what his movement capabilities were, but I suspect that if he were alive at that time, in order to revive him at that point, he would have needed intravenous fluids and probably tube feedings in a hospital. So it's possible that he could have been dead for up to around 8 hours or more, but it's also possible he could have been dead for a little bit less than that as well.
But you are willing to say that he wasn't dead for the last 5 days?
No, usually we start to see decomposition take place, and so when I observed the body, again, this is on August 31st, he started to show what I would call the early stages of decomposition. So that would have been a little bit of skin sloughing, and that was near the area of the severe diaper rash. When people are 3 to 5 days after death in a warm environment, I was told it was about 80 to 85 degrees in the room, one would start to see bloating, the skin would start to discolor, they would see sunken eyes, sometimes you can get mummification of the fingertips, and all those different stages had not started yet.
And when you say homicide, earlier you described that as death at the hands of another. So how does that fit into this case?
So when you have a person who is dependent on another person for their survival, the neglect or the absence of that critical care also falls under that at the hands of another. So it's an act of omission rather than commission.
Okay, Jonna, now it appears that Sterling was dead for some time. It's a question of how long. Right. But the time becomes a critical element in terms of the charge here, correct?
Well, what the medical examiner is just explaining is how he came to determine that the manner of death was a homicide versus something else, accident, natural causes. And what he was just explaining on the stand is when you have such severe neglect, and Jesse, it was hard to listen to that, right?
Yeah.
You have such severe neglect when on an infant who is dependent upon somebody for everything, right? To feed them, to clothe them, to keep the temperature okay. Then that's how he was drawn to the conclusion that this was indeed a homicide as opposed to some sort of accident or natural causes.
This is a really difficult case
to
sit.
My goodness.
Imagine being the jury and sitting and listening to all of this, but it's important because the prosecution is still building their case, and they rested last week, and again, when we expect the live feed tomorrow, the defense will begin their case. Let's continue on with Dr. Timothy Huntington, who is a forensic entomologist who can explain a little bit more of the details of baby Sterling's death. Take a look.
Right, so it's your opinion, and you hold that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that Sterling was alive when he was infested?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have an opinion as to how long Sterling had been infested while he was still living?
Yes. The period of infestation for those maggots to develop to the stage that they were at would have been between 9 and 13 days.
Would that make August 20th being the latest date at the minimum when the infestation could start?
That would put it at, the 20th or 21st would be the last possible date, and it certainly could have been before that.
Do you have an opinion as to whether during this period of infestation that Sterling had been cleaned, bathed, or been moved at all?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
The maggots, in association with Sterling's diaper, were there primarily to feed on, they were attracted to one of really three things. Either the feces, the urine, or the extreme diaper rash. If there had been bathing or diaper changing or changing of the clothing or bedding, things of that nature, those maggots would have gone with the changing. So if you if you think about maggots in a diaper full of feces, you change a baby's diaper, you wipe off the feces, that takes that food source with it, and those maggots are going to be associated with the food source. So had any of that taken place, those maggots would have gone away. They wouldn't have been developed to the stage that they were. And in this case, again, the feces, urine soaking, and then that kind of the extreme diaper rash could have been attractive. Any of the three could have been an attraction to those flies, and they're going to try to gain access. For the flies to lay eggs, they have to be able to get to it, because they're not just going to dump out eggs somewhere and hope that their maggots crawl to it. So there's going to be a period of time where the flies are crawling into the area, trying to get access to that diaper area.
How long would Sterling have needed to be in that dirty diaper before that attraction started?
Well, the attraction can certainly start right away, because anybody who's ever been around little kids, you know when a kid has a dirty diaper, if you can smell it, the flies can smell it way before you can. And so that would be enough of an attraction for the flies to say, hey, there's a spot I can lay eggs. But for the flies to actually get to that area would have taken some more time. Diapers, of course, are designed to keep all of that stuff in, right? That's why we buy diapers. And so that's going to provide a pretty extreme barrier for the flies to gain access, and it's going to take them some time to defeat those barriers.
And how do they do that?
Well, they can certainly smell it, and then once they can smell that attraction, they look for just about any way they can to.
The details of this, Jonna, extremely disturbing. I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
But it's important, right? And the idea that the maggots, as disgusting as it is, it's as horrible as it is to think about what baby Sterling went through and what he experienced because he died from a combination of malnutrition, dehydration, and this infection from the diaper rash.
Yeah.
The maggots tell a time frame, don't they? Like the 9 to 13 days is critical for the prosecution's case.
Exactly. They do give us basically a timeline, if you believe this expert's testimony. And two, it really helps the prosecution kind of sew up or maybe take the wind out of the sails of the anticipated defense. Because, listen, we're sitting here as professionals listening to this. You got 12 people in a jury box who aren't professional lawyers listening to this, and they have got to be saying to themselves, there was so many opportunities for this woman to save this child, and instead she just let the filth and the flies and did nothing. And they're going to be hard-pressed. Regardless of what the expert is going to say, they're going to be hard-pressed to find that this woman could not have assisted this child before the child died.
Especially when there was a 2-year-old in the house who's being taken care of. Especially when Sterling's room was right there. How do you not go in? Now, here's the thing. She's showing a lot of emotion in this trial. What do you make of that?
Well, hopefully she is a human being, and maybe she was struggling emotionally with something, and maybe she was on meth or some sort of drug during this period. Those are not full-blown excuses. Thankfully, she's got some feelings. Her 4-month-old baby is dead and dying the most disgusting way. She better be crying in there.
What does the jury think about when they look at this?
I don't know if it's going to matter. I think they're going to be focused on the witnesses here, and if she weren't crying, I think it would be much more detrimental to this defendant.
Okay, well, we have more to talk about in this case. Thanks for joining us. We're going to keep going on with the Cheyanne Harris trial. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the Cheyanne Harris case out of Iowa. The woman who's charged with first-degree murder and child endangerment in connection with the death of her 4-month-old son, Sterling. A disturbing case. The details are not easy to listen to, but it's important because the prosecution just rested their case last week, and the trial will begin again tomorrow, where the defense will begin their case. But before we even get there, one of the things that Jonna Spilbor and I were just talking about in our break was there anybody else around this family? Did anybody else get a sense of something might be wrong here? Then we saw the testimony of Jennifer Shriver, who's a neighbor and a babysitter of the two children, Sterling and his older sister, 2-year-old Nyla. Let's learn from her what might have happened here, and she provided some very illuminating details about the parenting of Zachary Cohen and Cheyanne Harris. Take a look.
Were you asked to babysit the children that same day?
Yes.
Who asked you to babysit the kids?
I believe it was Zach. I'm not sure. 100%. Yeah, pretty much. I think it was Zach.
And so, which kids did you babysit?
I babysat for Nala and for the baby Sterling.
And who were Nala and baby Sterling's parents?
Cheyanne and Zach.
And Cheyanne was the mother, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, how long did you babysit the children?
The first time it was about 17 hours.
About 17 hours?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time you met Mr. Cohen, correct?
Yes.
Same day?
In person.
And you had met Miss Harris twice before?
Yes, I had spoken with her twice before. She had a notebook where she left little notes on when Nala had Tylenol because she wasn't feeling well. There was instructions. They had different diaper wipes for sensitive skin, different diapers. She was, step by step, pretty organized.
And so was she able to explain to you which wipes you need to use for Nala and which separate wipes you need to use with Sterling?
Yes, she did.
Did she provide clothing for Nala?
Yes.
Was it appropriate clothing?
Yes.
And did she describe to you how you were to use the clothing?
Yes.
And the same for Sterling. Did she provide clothing for you to use for Sterling?
Jonna, a common theme that we keep seeing throughout this case is that there seemed to be, from one perspective, a favoritism here, that the parents seem to take care of the 2-year-old, but not Sterling. There was attention for her, but not for him. Do you get that sense as well?
From this testimony, a couple of things really struck me. Number one is, basically, this couple gave a total stranger put that person in charge of caring for an infant for 17 hours, if I heard that right, which is unheard of.
Right.
Number one. And number two, the mother did seem to care. She had a list of instructions. Here are the baby wipes you're going to use. Here's the formula. Yeah, we're working on his weight. He seems to be a little bit underweight. That, to me, are all signs of a mother who does care about a child, but then turned him over for 17 hours to a total stranger. I'm confused at this point.
Let's keep playing the testimony of this neighbor, because it's really interesting to understand what led up to ultimately Sterling's death. Let's keep going.
I want to go through your observations of the children the second time you watched them, okay? Let's start with Nala. First of all, let me back up just a minute. When you watched the kids the second time, did Miss Harris also seem as well organized as she was the first time?
Absolutely.
Can you describe that for the jury?
She came with her little notebook. Her diaper bags were all organized. It was pretty much the same as the first.
So like the first time, she provided you with directions on how to care for the children. She provided you proper size clothing, proper diapers for each child, etc.?
Yes.
Did you notice any change in Ms. Harris and her organizational skills in those intervals of a couple weeks?
No.
Now, the second time when you were asked to watch Nala near the end of July or the 1st of August, was Nala properly clothed?
Yes.
Was she still chubby or chunky?
Yes.
Still appeared to be properly nourished?
Yes.
How about Sterling? How did he appear?
He was still clean, still seemed lightweight, but seemed a little bit healthier, or a little bit heavier, but not a whole lot.
A little bit heavier, you said?
Yeah.
Now, the second time you interacted with Sterling, was he still a happy baby?
Yes.
Would he smile?
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean?
He would always show you a smile. Give him a little coochie coo and he'd show you a little smile.
How much would he sleep in a day?
Yeah, he sleep about, I don't know how much he would sleep. 2 hours at a time.
And how long would he be up for?
Baby sleep all the time, so he would be up for maybe an hour, hour and a half, and want a little nap or whatever.
When the time he was up, what would you do with him?
I would hold him, play with him, give him as much of attention. I didn't put him down a whole lot. I like to hold my babies when I have my babies, so.
When you say you play with him, what do you mean?
Just kind of interact with him and talk to him and, let him know that I was there.
Would he interact back with you?
A little bit. He'd shoot me a smile or he'd coo.
During the second time that you had Sterling, was he still a happy baby?
Jonna, based upon this testimony in this trial and testimony from the Zachary Cohen case, did you get the sense that people might have felt something was a little wrong with Sterling, but nobody thought that this was abuse, nobody thought that this was neglect, nobody thought it rose to the level of intervening?
Yeah, that's the indication that I have. And you have to remember, it's not a neighbor's duty, for example, to alert authorities if they think something's wrong, although you would hope that they would. Like it is a doctor's duty.
Right.
So we haven't heard any testimony that the child was going to the doctor. I am just really struck that a woman who entrusted a stranger with her baby for 17 hours, that this same neighbor, when not seeing the baby for 7 to 13 days, because that's what the testimony was, that this child was sitting his own filth, didn't knock on the door, didn't, just out of curiosity. This witness seemed to appreciate and love baby Sterling, as a neighbor could, as a babysitter could, yet didn't knock on the door and say, hey, is everything okay?
You're not the only one. I'm sure people look at this case and say, hey, what about Child Protective Services? How come they weren't alerted to this at an earlier point? But it's not so simple, is it?
No, it's not so simple, but it is very easy to alert Child Protective Services, and you do so anonymously. So I'm assuming that they were not alerted at any point in this poor little 4-month young life.
Well, we're going to talk about Child Protective Services in a minute, but before our next break, I just want to ask you, sitting on a jury like this, if you're the defense, what kind of jury do you need? Because listening to these details, how does it not affect someone's judgment?
And I'm torn. I don't know whether you want mothers who may have suffered from postpartum depression on that jury, or if you want professionals who know about postpartum depression on that jury to sort of cut through this. Because otherwise, we're sitting here having a very difficult time listening to these facts. Imagine what 12 lay people in a jury are doing right now.
Absolutely. I don't know how you just sit on there and listen day in and day out, but the more power to them. And this jury really, it does have a tough case to consider. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to play the testimony of Sheila Schroeder, a child protective worker. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the Cheyanne Harris case. We'll be back live there tomorrow. But right now, we're recapping testimony that you may have missed from last week. And one of the questions that keeps coming up is, where is Child Protective Services? And we're going to get into that in a minute. But before we do, we also saw the testimony of Sheila Schroeder, who was a child protective worker that interviewed Miss Harris and Zachary Cohen, Sterling's father, about a month after Sterling's death. Her interview provided a very interesting insight into the defendant. Take a look.
I would characterize the efforts that I made as diligent. Cheyanne and her partner, it was a difficult conversation. There were several phone calls back and forth before the couple agreed to meet with me.
And did they ultimately agree to meet with you?
Yes, they did.
Who set the location for the meeting?
The couple decided where they wanted to meet with me.
And did you honor their request?
Yes, I did.
And where did you agree to meet with them?
At the public library in Osage.
And is that a community that's in a neighboring county to Chickasaw County?
Yes, I believe so.
I didn't mean to give you a geography lesson, I'm sorry. And your report says that you met with the couple on September 1st of 2017 at about 2:45 p.m. Is that what you recall?
Yes.
When you met with Cheyanne Harris, did you get a chance to observe her demeanor, her appearance, her mood?
Yes, I did.
And how would you describe her demeanor during your interactions with her?
When I met with Cheyanne, she provided information regarding the situation. She was tearful at times, but I do believe she was engaged in the interview.
Did she, based on your interactions with her, did you form the opinion that she could comprehend the questions that you were asking?
Yes.
Did she provide information that was consistent to be responsive to your questioning?
Yes, she did.
And you said she was engaged. What do you mean by that?
She was making eye contact with me. She was answering the questions that I was asking. I believe she was thoughtful in her answers as she was consistent throughout the interview.
Did you have any concerns that Ms. Harris was under the influence of any drugs or medications or alcohol when you met with her?
No.
Okay, well, there she says no, she didn't feel that Cheyanne was under the influence of anything. But really, the more interesting aspect of this case is why wasn't Child Protective Services brought in initially? Now, what we know from the first trial is that Sterling was born in a bathtub, and when he was taken to the hospital, they did a test, and they found the presence of meth in the umbilical cord. But apparently those results weren't transmitted to the state. So the State Protective Services didn't know about this. What's going, what?
And that's an example of the system failing this poor child. I have represented people over the course of my career who are doing drugs while they have a baby in utero, and the state or the county is right there to take that child at the moment that that woman gives birth to that child to protect the child. That is the purpose, the primary purpose of that agency, and it failed miserably here.
Without knowing more details, would you say that somebody made a mistake in this whole grand scheme, that Sterling wasn't taken away from this family earlier? Or is it hard to judge at this point?
It's hard to judge, and like I said, it's nobody else's responsibility but the parents. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody else. But you would just think, in our normal day-to-day, Jesse, that there was a neighbor who was a babysitter, that there was the presence of meth that was missed at the moment of this child's birth, that this child, we think, I don't know, did they have a doctor appointment from 0 to 4 months? Did anything? So somewhere along the line, this child really slipped through some cracks.
Okay, well, let's continue on with Sheila Schroeder, this child protective worker, and we will learn more about what she observed in this really tragic case.
How long approximately did you meet with Ms. Harris?
I don't recall a specific time. Generally, when I meet with parents for the types of questions I was asking, it's about an hour.
Now, you had testified a moment ago that your purpose in interviewing Ms. Harris was to obtain information, right?
Yes.
Now, your report says that the parents provided information on their terms, doesn't it?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
When I was asking questions and gathering information, there were times when I was asked to refer to law enforcement for those questions because they had already been answered.
What do you mean?
Her partner just talked about the things that I was asking had already been answered by law enforcement. And it didn't seem that they would wanted to talk about those things a second time with me.
Did you screen Ms. Harris for the use of any illegal drugs or medications?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
It's part of our assessment process and gathering information.
Why would the Department of Human Services be concerned with a parent who's using illegal drugs?
Because it affects their parenting ability and how they provide care to their child.
How so?
For example, if they're using a mood-altering substance, something illegal, they may neglect their child, not feed them, not change their diaper, not tend to their basic needs.
When you screened Ms. Harris for her use of illegal drugs, did you ask her about her illegal drug use?
Yes, I did.
And what was her response?
It was learned through the interview that she used methamphetamine approximately 1 week before Sterling's death.
And the 1 week before Sterling's death time frame for using methamphetamines, who provided that time frame?
I believe Cheyanne.
Okay, that's important. That's important, right? So she interviews Cheyanne and Zachary Cohen, and right after Sterling dies. And the question is, if she was using meth a week before Sterling died, that fits into the time frame of when this neglect was really at its height, correct?
Yeah, and that information certainly could help prove guilt in this case. But here's another thing, Jesse, from my experience. People who are on drugs lie about when they do drugs. So she said, oh yeah, I did it a week before. She could have done it the day before, the day of. We can't trust that information because the source of that information is the person who's on trial here.
Look, another way to look at it is she doesn't know the details and the science behind Sterling's death. And maybe she's like, well, if I say that I did drugs a week before, not a day before, maybe it looks that, I don't know what the truth is, but that's another way to look at it, right?
It could be a very self-serving statement in her mind if she said, well, I did it a week ago, so I was okay on the day my baby died, therefore I'm not guilty. Who knows?
Yeah. We have a lot more to obviously talk about in this case, and we will. But when we come back, we're going to switch gears and talk about a new development in the Donald Smith case. As we keep talking about, he was found guilty of kidnapping, raping, and ultimately killing an 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle. We covered the trial. He was found guilty and ultimately sentenced to death. While in new secret jailhouse recordings, he talks with his mother about these crimes. Pretty incredible. So, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here by Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. We've been talking about the Charles Merritt case as well as the Cheyanne Harris case, our two trials we've been focusing on here on the network as of late. But right now, we're going to switch gears and let's talk about a new case right now. Do you remember here on the network that we covered the Donald Smith trial, the man who was ultimately found guilty of abducting, raping, and killing an 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle? That jury ultimately recommended, and he was ultimately sentenced to death. He's currently on death row. Well, we have an update for you. There are new secret jailhouse recordings between him and his mother where he discusses these crimes. And I don't really have to preview it any more than this, but I will warn our viewers, this can be disturbing. Take a look. This is Donald Smith speaking with his mother.
I have moved her out of the building. I'm like asking you to ran out. She touched herself to me. So I'm thinking about it, telling Scary, hey man. But he drives off. He's right in front of my van. He drives by. As she runs up, got my van going. She just comes right in the van. That's what I told Harry. He says, man, what she got in your van? Fuck. Are you ready for me? I don't view children as sexual objects. I don't view them as sexual objects or sexual partners. All I know is that I snapped. And the next thing I know is I'm sitting in the driver's seat of my van. And my breathing is ragged. And I look on the back seat. She's dead. I swear, I don't know what woman I was so far gone.
Wow. Okay, so that was pretty incredible right there. Jonna, I'm just going to get your reaction. What do you think of that?
God, my chin is hitting the floor. This man is disgusting. He's right where he needs to be. You remember, Jesse, during the trial, he basically duped this family and duped this little girl into coming into his van. And how convenient that he has no memory of what happened between the time that he did that and the time that this 6-year-old girl was lying dead in the back of his van. Very
He seems to put the blame on her.
Yeah, she attached herself to me like it was all her fault when he was a mastermind villain to get her and to convince the family to get her into this van, and then hours later this young child is dead. It's disgusting.
Yeah, and he says, oh, I don't view children as sex objects. you raped her. You raped her and killed her. So I'm not sure how that quite flies, but let's start right now as we recap this development with trying to understand where this case was, and we'll start right now with the prosecution's opening statement in the Donald Smith case. Take a look.
Cherish Periwinkle was 8 years old. She weighed 67 pounds. Separated from her mother, her little sisters, from all she knew, the Savior in this world. She spent the last petrifying hours of her life with him. He gagged her. He raped her. He sodomized her. And then he strangled her. He gagged her with such force, her gums and her nostrils bled. He strangled her with such force, her eyeballs bled. Cherish did not die quickly, and she did not die easily. In fact, hers was a brutal and tortured death. And after he killed her, he pulled her little, lifeless body through the woods, pushed it under the water, forced it under a tree, and took asphalt, bricks, and debris and weighted her down. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case, piece by piece, we will present to you and show you and prove to you an insurmountable case of guilt in this case. So what can you expect? Defense counsel told you last week that the evidence in this case is both gut-wrenching and gruesome. Those were their words. It is graphic. It is disturbing. And while last week during jury selection there were moments of levity where we, and he, even laughed, I assure you there are no moments of laughter in this trial. I do not think it will be an overstatement to say that each of you will be changed at the end of this trial. The evidence is graphic, but every person has a constitutional right to confront the evidence against him, no matter the weight, the nature, or the volume of that evidence. It is your job to look at that evidence, the evidence of his destruction.
Well, gut-wrenching and gruesome is one way to describe this trial, and that was the prosecution's opening statement. The question became, what would the defense argue? Let's see what they said in their opening statement.
Good morning. We are here in this courtroom because the state of Florida is seeking the death penalty. And you have just heard an emotionally charged opening statement designed to anger you. What we are asking you to do, as Americans in this country, is demand the state of Florida live up to their burden of proof. Ultimately, they will come in and they will identify that stranger. And they will tell you, we don't know if anyone else was in that van. But we literally thought, maybe we do know him, maybe he somehow knows the father they were trying to wait. So they eventually go to McDonald's that's physically outside of Walmart, about 2 miles away. They didn't move him. All of these details will be important, ladies and gentlemen, for you to make legal decisions in this case. On June 22nd, 2013, a beautiful young child lost her life. And I won't mince words, it is horrendously tragic.
Okay, Jonna, let's talk about this defense. The defense seems to be putting the blame on Rain Periwinkle, Cherish's mother, for entrusting Donald Smith. But the even more interesting part about this, the defense ultimately dropped this defense because when Rain went on the stand, they didn't cross-examine her. What was going on here?
It was a smart move not to cross-examine this mother, who they had no problem blaming in their opening statement, which is a gigantic no, especially knowing what we know now, Jesse, knowing how the evidence panned out in that case. There was very little that this defense team could have done.
But from a legal perspective, what was the argument? How did they defend Donald Smith by putting the blame on the mother?
You know, hindsight is 20/20. Maybe what they were going for, well, first of all, they told us that this was going to be a case where the prosecution was not going to be able to meet their burden of proof. So it wasn't as if they were going to put on an affirmative defense. So maybe what they were going for was to negate a kidnapping charge or a sex charge or one of the other charges by showing that this man didn't seek this person out and grab this child and put her in the van, that this was the mother going along for the ride, literally and figuratively.
And maybe we kind of get a better sense of that because at the beginning of the program we were playing this new secret jailhouse recording between Donald Smith and his mother where he says, she jumped in the van.
Yeah.
She was the one. I had to get rid of her. You know, as soon as I realized she was in the van, I knew I was in trouble. Now, if you believe Donald Smith, and maybe that's what he told his attorneys, that's what they went with, right?
And look, I don't envy the defense attorneys in this case at all. They are tasked with a job. They have a job to do. They have to do it to the best of their ability. I am sure before we got to trial, they probably said to the prosecution, take the death penalty off the table and we'll serve him up to you on a silver platter. And the prosecution, rightfully so in this case, Jesse, said no deal.
He is on death row, and I want to talk more about that. And I also want to talk about, was it possible he could have been kept in prison and not been released, and maybe this never would have happened? We'll have a lot more to discuss. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk more about the Donald Smith trial. Welcome back to Law&Crime, everybody. We are recapping some of the Donald Smith case because of an explosive development that just came down. There are secret jailhouse recordings of Mr. Smith speaking with his mother about the crimes that he was convicted of, namely kidnapping, raping, and murdering 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle. And in these videos, he admits to killing this young girl, but first says that he snapped, then says he may have raped her, and then he even questions whether or not he can mimic a mental disorder in order to save his life. We are going to discuss a lot more from these videos, but right now let's go back to his trial. And one of the things that Jonna Spilbor and I were just talking about was the testimony of Rain Periwinkle. This is Cherish's mother. Really difficult testimony for her, but let's listen to what she had to say.
While driving from Dollar General to Walmart, did you ever see his wife or this gold car that she was apparently coming?
No.
Did you have any concerns while you were driving in the van with him?
Not so much because he told me I was safe.
He told you that you were safe?
Yes, he looked into my face and told me I was safe.
Did you want to believe him?
Yes, very much so.
Was that gift card something that you really wanted to be able to get stuff for your children?
Yes.
Eventually, do you get to the Walmart?
Yes, we did.
Did you immediately go right into the store once you arrived at the Walmart parking lot?
No.
What happened when you arrived at the Walmart parking lot?
My children were being fussy. They wanted to get out of the van, and I told him I needed to get out. And he took a phone call.
What do you mean he took a phone call?
He took his phone out of his pocket and started to talk.
Did you ever hear the phone ring?
No, I thought it was on vibrate. I wasn't paying attention.
Did the defendant, Donald Smith, join you and your girls in the children's clothing section of the store?
Yes.
Ma'am, why did you feel it okay to let Cherish walk to McDonald's with the defendant?
If he would have asked me if he could take her, I would have said no. But because McDonald's is inside Walmart with people around, I knew she would never leave my side.
Well, you've seen the photograph in the state's exhibit here. Did you know and believe that there were surveillance cameras in the Walmart?
Yes, I did.
You knew the McDonald's was in Walmart, right?
Yes.
Did you feel that if Cherish went to the McDonald's with him inside the Walmart that she would be safe?
Yes.
Had you known that they were going to leave the store, would you have let Cherish leave the store with the defendant?
No.
Did he ever ask you, can Cherish come with me to leave the store?
No.
Would you have ever let your child leave the store and leave the Walmart with this defendant?
No.
And that's just an example of how Donald Smith manipulated this woman to get to this 8-year-old girl. Now, Jonna, you and I both know that we're talking about Donald Smith because of his jailhouse recording that was just released. That manipulative nature, that's not the only time we heard it. Remember, what did he say to his mom about what he might be able to do in his trial?
He wanted to get a copy of the DSM-4, which is the book that basically describes people with mental illness and various mental illnesses, how they act, so that he could create a scenario where he could act mentally ill in order to get himself off. That is extremely manipulative.
This guy was evaluated by different psychiatrists to see what's going on with him. And they all said he's very smart, but he's deceitful. He's manipulative. And really, when we try to think of evil, you know, we cover a lot of cases.
Yes.
A lot of people have different issues, different reasons for why they kill. Is this pure evil when you look at Donald Smith?
This is pure evil, and evil is not a defense. While some mental illnesses could give rise to a defense, that's not what we're dealing with here. And how much is your heart breaking re-listening to this mother talk about how she got manipulated and how she was duped by this man. If she had a rewind button for life, she would be hitting it every day. She's got to live with this for the rest of her life.
He saw that she was in need. He saw that they were poor, they needed resources, and he took advantage of that by creating a fake story that he had a wife who was coming with a gift card. He never had a wife. There was no gift card. And really, what's the interesting thing to note is this case he keeps talking about in his jealous interview, how it's taken the nation by storm. It's really different than any other kind of case. He's not going to, how is he going to fare in prison if everybody knows about this case?
He knows that he is not going to fare well in prison while he's on death row because of the nature of his crime. For some reason, you know, there's honor among thieves. And in prison, when you rape a child and kill a child, you're not treated very friendly in terms of prison speak.
And that is not something that you can hide, especially if this case has so much attention to it, right?
Right.
But correct me if I'm wrong, if he could have convinced the jury one way or another that he suffered from some sort of mental disease or defect, he could have been transferred to a different area, right?
He could be transferred to a different area outside of general population where he's not going to fare well, and he might have had an actual defense, which we know did not occur in this case.
Well, Jonna, we got more to talk about with the Donald Smith case, so let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have a lot more to analyze. As we learn about the discovery of Cherish Periwinkle's body, I'm back here with Jonna Spilbor. And Jonna, you and I have been talking about the fact that Mr. Smith should not have even been present in the community.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't there so many opportunities for him to have been locked up?
So this defendant had a criminal history that stemmed back to the 70s, Jesse, and numerous times he was arrested, sometimes for low-level offenses, but sometimes not. Sometimes he had a couple of sex crimes mixed in there for which he could have done a whole lot of prison time. For whatever reason, he did not. And in fact, part of his probation or parole in one of his cases was he was ordered to participate in chemical castration, which he only did for a short period of time, thereby violating his probation or parole, and still Nobody does a darn thing about it, and that's why this man was out on the street.
So 3 weeks before he kills Cherish, he had been released from prison on a previous sex crime conviction. How does that happen? How does he fall through the cracks of the system?
You know, he didn't just fall through the cracks. When you look at his history, he was basically pushed through the cracks. There was plenty of opportunity for him to be committed for much longer. In fact, in part of his history, they wanted to involuntarily commit him because of his sexual and violent tendencies, and that didn't happen. What a shame. What a shame it didn't.
It really is. Wow. Okay, well, we have a lot more to talk about. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back here on Law&Crime, we have a lot more to discuss. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. We have an update for you out of Colorado. You know the Kelsey Bereth case, the missing Colorado mother and flight instructor. She went missing back on Thanksgiving. Patrick Frazee, her fiance, was arrested in December and charged with her murder and 3 counts of solicitation to commit murder. Well, ABC News is reporting that a new person, a nurse from Idaho, may be pleading guilty to a charge in connection with Kelsey Bereth's disappearance. It's believed that she is having a court appearance on February 8th, which is this upcoming Friday, and it's believed from her relatives that she may enter a plea deal with prosecutors. One of the areas where we believe she may be pleading guilty to is possibly disposing of evidence in connection with the disappearance of this woman. Obviously, the details are still coming forward. We'll update you as soon as we have more information, but this is a huge development, and one of the most eerie parts of this whole case, we still don't know exactly what happened to Bereth when her body has not been found. But obviously investigators are continually searching for clues and answers, and we here at Law&Crime will always report back to you the latest developments. Again, that is the Kelsey Bereth case. Let's switch gears and go back to what we were talking about before our last break, the Donald Smith case, the man who was found guilty of kidnapping, raping, and murdering an 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle, ultimately sentenced to death. He's currently on death row. The reason we're talking about this case today is because a new secret jailhouse recording was released between Mr. Smith and his mother, talking about him killing this young girl and him giving different justifications for why he did that. And at one point, he even says that he wants to manipulate the system by faking having a mental illness. Now, we'll talk about that new jailhouse recording a little bit later, but right now we're recapping his trial. And during his trial, we saw an earlier jailhouse recording where Mr. Smith had a lot to say about his involvement in the Cherish Periwinkle case. Take a look.
Here they come. No one in the back.
Detective Carter, the voice that you just heard that said the one in the back, is that the inmate who was housed directly adjacent to the defendant, Donald Smith?
Yes, sir.
Second voice that's on that recording, is that the voice of Donald Smith?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the person who said they're about 12.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You still think she's 12? Yeah. That's right in my alley right there. That's my target area right there. That's what I go after. Well, you have fun with that one.
Officer Carter, the person who said That's my target area. That's what I go after. Whose voice is that?
The defendants.
You still think she's 12? Yeah. That's right in my alley, right there. That's my target area right there. That's what I go after. Well, you have fun with that one. See, her law should be the same here. Yeah. Let that girl run out looking like that, man, with fake eyelashes, fake fucking nails, fake hair, fake titties, probably. Yeah, I'd like to run into her at Walmart.
Officer Carter, the voice that just said, I'd like to run into her at Walmart. Is that the voice of the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Let me just inquire. The voice that we just heard that said, Cherish has some butt on her, that was not this defendant, correct?
Yes, sir.
That was the other inmate in the adjacent cell.
Yes, sir.
Cheyanne like that, though. That's why she ain't black. She ain't black for a white girl.
The last voice that was depicted there that said, because she ain't black, but she had a lot for a white girl, was that the voice of this defendant?
Yes, sir.
Officer Carter, this recording was made 2 years after the defendant was arrested, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I got no words, Jonna.
I do.
You tell me what you think of that.
I do. Something very revealing in that audio, and it was this. When he makes the horrible comment that he wanted to run into her, and talking about children at Walmart, you know what that said to me, Jesse? Cherish Periwinkle was not the first time that this man tried to dupe somebody into his car for rape and murder. He was a death salesman. He probably had done this a number of times and finally got lucky when Cherish Periwinkle came around.
He said that was his target area.
Yes.
Why would he be blatantly talking about this, especially when we keep talking about the idea how in prison or in jail, you don't want to be that person. You know, it's not good for you to be like that.
I don't know why this guy decided to talk to his cellmate or whoever he was talking about it, but it's disgusting. And if there's any doubt in any juror's mind, you listen to that audio, and there will not be.
Well, they obviously found him guilty, and they found him guilty very quickly, and ultimately he was sentenced to death.
Which is not good enough. It's not enough. It's not adequate, Jesse, my opinion. Always a pleasure to be here.
Topic for another time.
I know.
Jonna, thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. When we come back, we're going to talk about a different trial, Charles Merritt. We'll be right back here on Law and Crime.